1927. A mountain sacred to the Lakota Sioux known as Six Grandfathers is now the home of a massive government project. Originally promised to the Sioux, gold was discovered nearby. 250 Lakota men, women, and children are killed by U.S. troops at the Wounded Knee Massacre, and Six Grandfathers goes to the government. 1948. Six Grandfathers has been transformed into Mount Rushmore, home to the massive carvings of 4 white United States presidents, including Thomas Jefferson, who once said of Native Americans, "We shall destroy them all." 17 miles away, a similar project begins, an attempt to honor Lakota warrior Crazy Horse, on a mountain still in Lakota lands, who'd been previously killed by a U.S. soldier. Mount Rushmore is done in 14 years. Crazy Horse remains unfinished. 1971. A Yankton Sioux woman in a buckskin dress walks into the Iowa Capitol building with one demand: give me back my people's bones. 19 years later, the United States finally fulfills her request, passing legislation that forces the country to universally respect the dead and where they lie. It only takes one person to begin a journey that can affect thousands and start new conversations. This Yankton Sioux woman from Iowa was named Maria Pearson. This would not be her first, nor her last fight for her people.
She was extremely loyal to people who she trusted. She was a fierce enemy, but she could work with and forgive enemies.
And, she was an outgoing, colorful person who said what she thought. And I respected that. I appreciated that. And we were able to, get along and work things out.
Maria Pearson was born in 1932 to the tribe of the Yankton Sioux in Springfield, South Dakota. Her Yankton Sioux lineage traced through both sides of her family, but despite that tie, Maria was confirmed Catholic and attended boarding school.
She has kind of an interesting one foot in her native history and one foot in kind of more modern day history.
As was tradition for a large family, some children were raised by other family members. So Maria grew up in the home of her grandmother, Minnie Paji Keller, who surrounded Maria with family, nature, and helped her find her voice in Native traditions.
Well, her grandmother had a good part in raising her and had taught her many of the indigenous religious traditions and rituals.
These lessons and ties to her grandmother would become essential to her activist life. Maria grew and began her own family with 6 children and married John Pearson. Eventually, Maria and her family made the move to Marnie, Iowa, setting the stage for her national battles.
John worked for the Highway Commission, which is now known as the Department of Transportation here in town. So he worked on building bridges and roads and things like that. And so here you have Maria, who's married to someone who's doing that kind of work for the state here in town, but still has her native roots. The Glenwood incident happens in 1971. They're near Glenwood, Iowa. They're adding a highway in and discover some graves there, an old pioneer grave site. But so they found 26 Caucasians and also one Native American grave with, I believe, a young child with her.
The white burials, the Caucasian pioneer burials, were immediately reburied, and the flexed burial, buried in a crouched position in a circular grave pit, was taken to Iowa City because she was interesting. Well, at the time, I thought, why not study the whites? They're interesting too.
And so John comes home from work one day and just kind of says to Maria, like, you don't want to hear about my day today. And that's kind of what starts this whole thing with her knowing. I mean, obviously, it's well known in Native American communities that things like this were happening, that graves were being disturbed by either archaeologists or pot diggers is what she liked to call, and sometimes she even called the archaeologists pot diggers themselves.
There is no word for reburial in the language of the Yankton Sioux. The idea of digging up the deceased, of disturbing the dead in such a manner was so foreign to them, the concept was never named.
To Maria, that really didn't seem fair. The 26 Caucasians went to a local cemetery, were put in new caskets, brought over there. But the young Native woman and her child were brought to the University of Iowa to get studied. And to Maria, that just didn't seem like there was any equality in death there at all. They were treated like they were an extinct species almost.
And when she had heard about the burials being dug up at Glenwood, she went outdoors to get some fresh air and think through the situation. And her grandmother's voice came to her in the rustling of the tree leaves.
That's when she, I think, really kind of gets the bug to start doing something. And that's when she goes down to the governor's office down in Des Moines.
And so she dressed in her finest regalia, her beads and her moccasins. Her Indian name translates as running moccasins, and her shawl and so forth, and drove to Des Moines and went to the State House and walked into the governor's office and told the secretary, "I am here to see the great white father." As I say, she had a sense of humor. And the secretary was like totally discombobulated.
They've trying to dismiss her right away. Obviously she didn't have an appointment or anything like that. So they're, the secretary and the interns are doing their job to keep the governor doing his job in a way.
So finally she got in to see Bob Ray. And he said, wanted to know what she wanted of him. And she said, "Give me back my people's bones."
Maria's excursion to the capital had far-reaching consequences. From then on, she had the governor's attention. The Native American mother and daughter were returned to western Iowa for reburial by the governor's own jet, personally escorted by Maria.
He takes her very seriously, and this kind of starts this whole relationship between them about understanding about where each person is coming from, I think. And by the governor not just kind of dismissing her out and having an aide take her number and we'll get back to you. He actually kind of sits there and has a conversation with her. And I think that's just really what starts this whole movement in Iowa and nationally.
She led directly to the reframing of the Iowa Burial Code. And that she also had a receptive audience at the Office of the State Archaeologist by that time. Through Dwayne Anderson.
What it meant to us in the state archaeologist's office was that if anything was found or even we got a report, the first thing we did was let the Indian community know through Maria.
But eventually, Maria, I think, was pretty aggressive and as a leader in that group, and met with and worked with Governor Ray, and they were able to pass that Indian Burial Act, which was, I think, really leading legislation and copied in many other states.
So there were several meetings to discuss this and try to make a proposal that would be a win-win for everybody. A win for Native Americans to get skeletal material off the shelves of universities and museums, and hopefully get them studied and reburied, and to rebury artifacts of cultural patrimony.
But really, I think that was an initiative that Governor Ray really led on. And he worked closely with Maria, I think, to develop the legislation, Maria and others, to develop the legislation. And then, of course, we passed it and it became law.
Maria's platform would only get larger. Her activism for Native Americans moved to a national level, culminating in her best-known work, the passage of NAGPRA.
So after they got the Iowa law passed, that started to get, it was a chain reaction, really. You get a lot of other states in the areas are starting to develop these. And so Maria really, she just does a big speaking tour, basically. She's going from, reading her autobiography, she's going to every corner of the US, doing things in DC. I even read she was going all the way down to Brazil and England to do these to speak about what they did in Iowa and why it's important to respect these graves and treat them like that, and to not treat Native Americans like they're an extinct species, because they do exist within us.
I made it a priority to be able to return her phone calls and stay in touch and work with her, and it worked out well. And I appreciated very much that she was able to solve a lot of challenges that came up from the Native American community in Iowa.
Not only was Maria energized and turned into an activist by that construction project and the disinterment of those remains, many American people of Native descent around the United States were beginning to ask questions about federal intervention in their lives in different ways.
The issues that Maria Pearson sought to resolve really stem from the land, kind of like all of the issues in our community do.
But it really opened the door to not only preserving human remains and objects of cultural patrimony, but to taking the archaeological understanding of a place seriously. We don't just dig things up now. We try to understand, where are we digging? Through what communities are we digging?
The federal legislation finally passed in 1990 became the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, known commonly as NAGPRA.
In that period from the 1970s, when Iowa created its Burial Act, and then other communities were beginning to look into it, and then 1990 when George H.W. Bush signed the NAGPRA into law.
NAGPRA had passed and the battle was over, but the war was still ongoing. While Native Americans seeking to protect their dead now had the law on their side, there were still many fights left to wage. However, Maria Pearson would no longer be the representation on the national stage. After NAGPRA's passage, she stepped back, but never gave up fighting for Native American rights and was still a fixture of her communities and organizations.
I would say Maria broke some of those initial boundaries, especially with the American Indian movement, that made Indigenous activists like myself and others in my generation a little bit more comfortable to come forward. We are no longer the first, and to be the first is one of the hardest things to do, and Maria did that for us.
Throughout her life, Maria had also battled cancer. Ultimately, that was a fight she would lose, passing away in May 2003. She was laid to rest in Ames, Iowa. For the Yankton Sioux, death is not the end, but simply the next leg of a long journey. No longer walking the earth, but now a part of it, Maria Pearson fights on through her legacy and her descendants. Her brothers and sisters, Indigenous people across the world, fight on, because death is not the end.
I am very appreciative of Maria Pearson's work, for my own community, because to us, there's just no belief that could excuse that, no matter how long or how distant those people are.
How can we educate people about Native history without having to put their ancestors on display, right? And now we have just wonderful improvements in the way children can learn about Native history without that terrible moment when you turn the corner and there's a glass box with somebody in it.
I think modern day activism consists of finding your platform and finding your voice and making it specifically your own, which is something I really admire and I'm excited to see continue to develop in the future. There's no one way to advocate for an issue or for a group of people, but the way you advocate, it's your own voice. And I think that's really beautiful.
What would happen if Maria didn't come around and help get this one law passed? Would all these other states have done it? Maybe, but could it have taken another 20 years longer? Would we have gotten to NAGPRA? So this whole little ripple of what we're here today just kind of starts with this one law in Iowa, which Maria says it's one law, it's one paragraph, and it kind of changed the world.